Fire! Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Cold Fire, which is episode 10 of season 2 of Star Trek Voyager. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek, and is determined by my user polls. The episode to win my latest user poll for Voyager was actually a tie between two episodes. The 7th season episode Arthur and this episode Cold Fire, and since I had declared myself to be the tiebreaker in the event of a tie, I decided I would rather review this episode Cold Fire. So Cold Fire is the episode in which Voyager encounters the second caretaker-like being that they've been looking for to help them get home, but finds that her name is Suspiria, and she's quite hostile to Voyager. They encounter a bunch of Okamba who are also hostile. They try to teach Cass how to use her telepathic abilities and try to get her to leave the station, but once their hostile intentions to destroy Voyager are made clear, Cass fights back against them, and with her help, Janeway is able to defeat Suspiria, who leaves without helping Voyager get home. So this is finally the follow-up that was intimated in the pilot episode of the entire show, The Caretaker, where the caretaker casually mentions that there's another being like him out there, and then Janeway ends the whole episode with this inspirational speech where she mentioned there's still another being out there who could get us home, so we will do whatever we can to find her. And then we never hear anything about it again until this episode, which comes one season later, where they finally follow up on it. Now, I had just read, I was not aware of this before, but I have just read that original concept of there being another caretaker, or Nassine apparently has they referred to. I believe the name of their species is first mentioned in this episode. Anyway, that there was another one of that species out there that could possibly get Voyager home. Apparently the concept was originally thought up as a sort of escape clause in case they felt the premise of the show, that is, of Voyager being lost in the Delta Quadrant, wasn't working, and they could use that as an escape clause in order to get Voyager back home instantly, and thus, if the premise didn't work. And apparently the studio insisted on this because they were very weary of the concept of the show. And so the fact that they never really followed up on it except for this episode, and this episode the Voyager doesn't get home, shows that by this time the producers were more comfortable and more secure with the concept of Voyager being lost in space. I always talk about how I feel like they should have brought Voyager home to the Alpha Quadrant earlier than the finale. I think season 2 probably would have been too early, if I'm being honest, but to me season 5 would have been perfect. I always mention the episode Timeless, like that they actually should have gotten them home, and that would have been much more amazing. Or, hey, they could have actually had a follow-up to this episode and had the female caretaker Suspiria, and then she got them home. This episode was referenced in season 6, where Janeway mentioned she wasn't eager. She suddenly changed her tune to not wanting to meet Suspiria again because, of course, Suspiria, tried to kill her and destroy the ship in this episode. But anyway, so, I don't know. I felt like there should have been another follow-up to this episode. It seemed like this was one of the main concepts introduced in the pilot episode, and they just followed up once, and then we never hear from them ever again, ever. But I guess it became even less necessary once Cass was written off the show. In fact, watching this episode sort of reminds me of how the original concept for the show was kind of rewritten in the later seasons, and it became more of a focus on the Borg or N709. And I will do my obligatory speech about how much I love season 2 and how I think it gets a bad rap and how much I think it's better in later seasons, but I already talked about this a lot in other videos. But anyway, yeah, I'm just reinforced by that by watching this episode, just so you know. Just the feel of it. Plus, more specifically, though, and unique to this episode, is this portrayal of Kes. Now, not that long ago, I reviewed a Season 3 episode where I talked about how that character was destroyed in Season 3, how they just wanted to get the sex appeal out of her, and they kind of went against everything that made this character great. This episode, for me, exemplifies the opposite of that. Why the character was great and when she was great and how she's great. And that's by exploring her telepathic or telekinetic abilities, and especially when she has these, training sessions with Tuvok, which I love. I love her relationship with Tuvok. I love how it's strictly professional, and I love the chemistry that they had, because Tuvok is trying to teach her how to use telepathic abilities, but he is approaching it from a Vulcan perspective, and so when she, they're exploring her abilities, and she's able to read Neelix's thoughts, and then she starts to giggle, and Tuvok is like, "We can't continue unless you control your emotional outbursts." And she's like, honestly, it just gets pissed with him. You can tell she's pissed with him. Like, "Outbursts? I was just giggling." And he's like, "Well, I will teach you some methods to control your giggles." And she doesn't seem really interested. She kind of humors him. It's like, "Okay, Tuvok, whatever. I'll see you tomorrow." And I love that dynamic, because it does show that he does have, superior. He's more aware of how to use his telepathic abilities, but Ocampa apparently are inherently more capable of, has stronger telepathic abilities. They've just never been shown how to use them. So she's more capable than him as a species, but as an individual, he's more knowledgeable than her and has ways to show him. But he's kind of tainting his, instructions by the fact that he's, through his Vulcan bias, basically, the fact that he's very much against emotions. And I love that nice detail. And then later in the episode, Kes is talking to Janeway and Tuvok together and talk about how she feels about being introduced to these other Ocampans. And it's like, I don't know, I'm feeling, very overwhelmed with, I'm a bit scared, I'm a bit nervous, but at the same time very excited. And Tuvok's like, perhaps the best reaction would be not to have an emotional reaction at all. And then Janeway steps in and is like, "But if you're not a Vulcan, these are very natural things to be feeling." And it shows that Tuvok totally has that Vulcan bias, and that Janeway's a bit more realistic and more relating to her more on that emotional level. So I think this is a great episode for Kes. And honestly, watching these Season 2 episodes with Kes does make me sad that they ruined and destroyed her character. The best later portrayal of Kes is the last episode she appeared in, The Gift, which, and since Season 4 was so amazing, I felt like they actually could have saved her episode. Or not her episode. They could have saved her character in Season 4, because Season 4 just had better writing. But, it is what it is. They need to write off a character because they introduced 709, so they got rid of Kes because, at the time, as I said, she was the weakest character in the show because they completely destroyed her in Season 3. Again, don't get me started on Season 3, but that's another thing, this is probably another reason why they never followed up on this episode, and they never followed up on Suspiria, because once they, Michael Piller was pushed out of the show, which I talked about again about how much that angers me, because he's clearly the best thing about the show. Once he's pushed out, they completely wanted to abandon any sort of storylines like that. They got rid of the Kazon and they killed off Seska, and they got rid of the Vidians, and obviously they just wanted to do their own thing, and Season 3 was just a complete and utter mess. But not here to talk about that. So it's just watching this in the heydays. This is basically the heydays of her character, because I think Jennifer Lee's performance in this episode was absolutely amazing. Like, it really shows me not only what the character is capable of and how they could have actually made her very interesting. Because to be fair, when they had her pining off after Tom Paris, or had like Neelix being completely jealous of her, like those were not good uses of her character. So she wasn't always used in a good way, which is the same thing with Neelix, by the way. But this was a good use of her character. This shows what her character is capable of if she's written for correctly. And it also shows what the actress is capable of, because she does a phenomenal job. And the director himself, Cliff Broyle, this is the first episode of Star Trek that he would direct, and he would go on to direct many more. He noted that he was very impressed with the performances by Jennifer Lean and also Tim Russ as Tuvok, saying that they just did a phenomenal job. And especially with Kes, like, I think her performance was. I love how there's definitely a horror type feel to this episode, and there's several moments of it where it does come off as a bit horrific. It definitely has that creepy feel to it, which I think it accomplishes very well. But one of my favorite moments of that is when she's showing off to Tuvok, like making the coffee hot thing that what's his face taught her. And she accidentally like sets Tuvok on fire and nearly kills him, and her reaction of like screaming is just bone chilling. Like, and I bought it. It's not like fake horrific screaming, but it is. You feel how horrified she is that she's nearly killing Tuvok, and absolutely, god damn, yeah, and I really absolutely sold that. And also later in the episode, when what's-his-face, the incompetent dude, attacks Neelix, the way she yells like "Neelix!" Again, she really sells that, it's just a really good job, in my opinion. And also you see, not just that, but also some of the more subtle acting, the way that you can tell that Kes is kind of torn in between these two sort of worlds, and how she's undecided, how she's curious, but how she's still, interested to find out more about her heritage or what she's capable of, but at the same time still has this attachment to the Voyager crew as her family, and how she's kind of torn between that. And she also does an amazing job of selling that. So her performance there is definitely one of the strong suits of this episode. Now, since I mentioned the sort of horrific type feel of this episode, that we did get a scene also later in the episode where Suspiria shows up, and she's like, Janeway lost contact with Tuvok and B'Elanna, who were in engineering. She goes to engineering, confronts her, and she's just like a little girl who's at first acts like a frightened little girl, until all of a sudden she's like, "You killed him!" And they have like an adult, obviously a much older woman, doing the voice coming out of this little girl. And then all of a sudden you see that Tuvok and B'Elanna are like suspended above air, right above Janeway, and like the blood's dripping on her. Like, that was an amazingly effective horror moment that, goddamn, that works extremely well. So now let me talk about Tanis. That's his name, the Ocampan dude, who's played by Gary Graham, who I recognize most from the Alien Nation TV show. I think it came out in the early 90s, I think. And I don't remember much about the show. I know it was based off of a movie that came out in 88 with James Caan, and Gary Graham played that same character that James Caan played, but in the TV show. And the one thing I remember most about that show is the opening, theme. There was I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it would be like some choir where it goes, oh, and it crescendos, and it cuts to that dude, Gary Graham in the car, just yelling, banging on the roof of his car, going, "Ah!" I don't know why that's the thing I remember. That's where I remember this actor most from. But of course, Star Trek fans would be more familiar with this actor as playing Zaval in Enterprise, the Vulcan ambassador who was an asshole at first and then became somewhat of a good guy in the final season. He played, and he was really obtuse too. I hated him, but anyway, he played him in the Enterprise. So that's what he's most known for in Star Trek. But I remember, I first saw this episode when it first came out. So it was, of course, before Enterprise came out. And so when I first saw it, I was like, hey, it's the guy from Alien Nation. But anyway, yeah, he talked about how it wasn't really fun working on the show, that he enjoyed and he liked doing it, and it was gratifying work, but he just thought that everyone was a bit wound up and very hard to get anything done. He said he enjoyed the cast, but not so much the working environment and the way the producers handled things. Which is pretty interesting, seeing as he would go on to work on Enterprise repeatedly. But yeah, I really liked him in the role of Tanis. I thought he, again, was a really good guest actor. He did a great job of portraying someone who was trying to be very thoughtful and kind to Kes, but at the same time had this ulterior motives and actually didn't care much for other species outside of his own, and was very, not trusting of Voyager. Now, and I thought the scenes of him teaching her how to use her powers were very powerful as well. So if you notice, I've been mostly talking about the positives of this episode, so now let me get into some negatives. I don't buy how sometimes the Ocampa, Tanis, and Suspiria particularly are evil in a way that I don't buy just for plot convenience, because they can't make it so Suspiria sends Voyager home, because as I said, they decided they like the premise of the show and they don't want to change it, so they had to make them antagonistic in order to give them a reason for why she wouldn't send Voyager home. But okay, so it starts off with when Tanis and the other Ocampa first come on Voyager, oh, why? You're looking, when Janeway says she's looking for, Suspiria, it's oh, why? You want to kill her? You want to destroy her? And it talks about, we know your reputation. Your reputation is that of, wherever your ship goes, death follows and all that. And apparently, this is a reoccurring thing throughout season 2, because apparently the Kazon has been spreading lies about Voyager to try to prevent Voyager from making allies, which makes sense. The Kazon are a bunch of idiot liars with no honor, and of course it's tactically sound to try to limit their abilities to make allies. But it actually doesn't make sense in this context, because they would not have contact with the Kazon. They're completely outside of. They're portrayed as kind of isolationist, and even if they weren't, they're smart enough to not listen to bullshit from the Kazon. So I kind of don't buy that they would believe that, and especially when very clearly, especially after meeting Kes, where they clearly see that that's not Voyagers, that they're not hostile. But Suspiria still thinks that Voyager killed the caretaker, and honestly, I think Suspiria is being very obtuse in that belief, and her rage of wanting revenge. I just don't buy that motivation. It seems done completely. She seems completely unreasonable, and it's done completely out of plot convenience, because the plot requires her to want to destroy Voyager, and I don't buy it. To me, it's just very, very contrived writing, and it just bothers me. And the other thing is, I talked about the scene where Allie kind of mocked it in my intro, where he goes, "Bring the fire." So I said that I liked the scenes with Tanis, teaching Kes how to use her telepathic abilities. But there's an asterisk to that, because they had that one scene where she's in the cargo bay, and she's feeling all life in the cargo bay, and he's like, "Oh, can you feel the life? Isn't it so great to feel it?" And I love how the way they portray this visually is to just turn up the contrast or completely, so all the plants and Tannis himself look like someone just went on the TV and just upped the contrast all the way up to show that life is vibrant. But anyway, and so he's saying that, and he's like, "Oh, isn't this so lovely? Oh, you feel all the life. Now bring the fire!" Like, that seemed like, wait, you're talking about, like, just wiping it all out. And the fact that Kess, her first reaction wasn't going to be like, what? What the fuck are you talking about, bring the fire? What the fuck is wrong with you? No, she actually went along with it and had that cool, it was a cool visual, to be fair, where she's standing there and all the fire is, like, running around her and she just lights everything on fire. And he's like, "Oh, do you feel that? Isn't that great?" And Kess is like, "Well, no, I just killed everything. They're all dead." And he's like, "Oh, live, life, death, or whatever. It doesn't matter." This is where he came off as a bit cartoonish villainy to me, and it lost me. Like, I didn't buy it, and I didn't buy that Kess would be willing to do that. So that was silly. And then there's the part where Kess is, like, considering moving to the station. She asked Neelix to come with her. How stupid is she to not notice that these people would never in a billion trillion years let Neelix come with her? Like, it should have been obvious to her from the get-go that these people are very prejudiced towards nanocompens, other than Suspiria, of course, and especially the way he talks. Oh, these small people. It reminds me of the way that Founders talked about solids. Like, oh, they will never understand what it's like to be in a link. They're just small and trapped in their bodies. He was like saying something similar. It's like, oh, they can't even have any telepathic things. They just feel things from touch. They're so small and just trapped in their little bodies. What in the hell out of that would make her think that they would even be a tinge receptive to allowing Neelix to come in the station? And she should have realized. And how shocked was she when she realized that they were actually, wanted to destroy Voyager? Like, she kind of should have picked up on that. But anyway, that's just what I'm thinking. And of course, like, the episode had to end with, "Oh, we haven't gotten home. We're not going to get home again," obviously. But, that's not that big of a deal for me. So anyway, my rating for Cold Fire out of 10 is an 8. Extremely good. Not quite a 9 or 10. But I did really enjoy this episode. As I said, I loved the way Kess was portrayed. I wish we would have gotten more on Voyager. It does make me wish there was an alternate reality where Kess stayed on Voyager throughout all 7 years, and they never got rid of Michael Peller, and they didn't try to make her a sex object, and instead they explored her telepathic abilities with Tuvok and all this throughout. Like, this is, honestly, I don't give a fuck about Threshold or Tuvix. I still think Season 2 is when Voyager was really good. Definitely more so than later seasons. But anyway. Yeah, and plus Neelix being all jealous and bullshit. Yeah, that sucked too. But it's not like this episode's amazing, and that's why I'm saying, oh, we don't have amazing episodes. It's the setup. It's the feeling. It's the continuity. It's the way of you having these Kess and Tuvok relationships and the other relationship with Janeway and just the way the whole crew jived and felt like a community. Like, it really, really felt like the later season completely lost this. But I've said this a billion times before. Anyway, that's it for my review of Cold Fire. I shall be back to cover many more Star Trek videos, as well as videos of many other shows like The Expanse, Star Wars: The Clone Wars, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all that. And thanks a lot for watching.